Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm Liz Bridgewater, the Director of Outreach at Climate Action Now. It will be just a few moments while people continue to gather. While we're waiting for everyone to join, I invite you to answer the icebreaker question that you'll see pop up on your screen in just a moment. Alrighty, you should be seeing that question now. Our icebreaker today is, where are you joining from, and what's your favorite real or fictional futuristic invention? If you're feeling up for it, please also share your video so we can all see each other this morning. We will be recording this event and it will be available publicly online or after this event. I'm very grateful for everyone who is here today for reasons. There is still hopeful information about the climate. People just hear about it. So thank you for joining us today to get your December monthly dose of climate. Over to Kaylee Beam, Director of Content at Climate Act. Over to you, Kaylee.
All right. Hello, everyone. Sorry for any connectivity troubles. I think we're all used to having a little bit of internet trouble here and there. But like Liz said, I'm Kaylee Beam, Director of Content at Climate Action Now. And thank you so much for answering our little icebreaker in the chat for those of you who were able to see it and get to it. Got some folks joining us from California, someone in Michigan, and two of you have answered that you want a time machine, which I think everyone can agree would be a pretty incredible invention to have. Before we beam me up, Scotty. Thank you, Susan. That's a great one. But anyway, before we transition into the live interview, we're going to warm up today by taking an action together inspired by our featured speaker's work. So if you are at our November monthly dose event, you know just how excited we are about our new tool, the Can Action Carousel, and that's what we'll be using to take action today. This web-based version of the Climate Action Now app makes it easy to send well-researched, personalized messages to business leaders and political decision makers. It offers an endless stream of actions, just like the Climate Action Now app, measures your personal impact, and lets you earn points toward the planting of real trees. And the best part is that any environmental organization, local chapter of a larger group, or community group that wants to scale up their impact can get one, whether they have their own website or not. So let me share my screen and show you just how easy it is to take action with the carousel. You should be seeing it shortly. All right, so as you will see, it only takes 3 clicks to take an action. First, click Do It Now. Then choose how you want to contact the decision maker you're reaching out to. Sometimes we have a call option, but today we'll just click the send message option. And because I put in my address earlier, the carousel knows who my federal, state, and sometimes even local officials are, depending on where you live. And all you have to do is click send message. There, you can preview the boilerplate, expand it if you want to edit it, and then just click send message, and it's that easy. You've taken action. Earlier, I mentioned earning points toward a real tree, and so far, the Climate Action Now community has actually planted over 400,000 trees together, which is pretty incredible.
And that's with our partner in Kenya, who the online sort of tree planting space has a lot of verification issues, but ours is extremely well verified. We have the biggest reforestation group in Kenya, the Earth Lungs Foundation, that we've published some webinars and videos with, doing highly verified and monitored work across East Africa.
Yes, and if you want to learn more about our tree planting partner, you can check out the recording of our October monthly dose, which was a really great conversation between Sam and the founder of that organization, Victor Mwanga. All right, so I just put a link in the chat. For those of you who want to access the carousel on your computers, you can go ahead and use that link. But if you'd like to use your phone or tablet instead, we also have a QR code here, which you can scan, and that will take you right to today's action. So just point your camera at it, wait for that pop-up to appear, and tap on it to get to the carousel. Of course, if you know... Go ahead, Sam.
Oh, so good. And this action is about grid scale battery power at the state level, because our speaker today, Daan Walter, has published really a world leading report on the incredible technological advances and unbelievable economic and civilizational potential for battery power as a way of arbitraging clean electrons across time. And Illinois has passed a battery bill to build resilience and affordability and clean up Illinois' grid that is one of the best in the nation. So we are doing battery focused action in honor of our battery focused speaker.
And just a couple more housekeeping things for me before we kick off what's going to be an awesome conversation. So if you go to the carousel, you've never used it before, you'll have to put in some basic information like your name, address, email, and you'll also be encouraged to set a personalized message. If you already have an app account but are using the carousel for the first time, don't worry, you shouldn't have to start from scratch. When you enter your email that's associated with your Climate Action Now app account, all you have to do is enter a verification code, and then it will transfer all of your progress from the app to the carousel. So that's all from me. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but turn my camera into the action slide so that you still have access to it. And now I'll hand things back over to Liz to introduce our speakers and get this hopeful conversation going. Over to you, Liz.
Thanks so much, Kaylee. Today, Sam Matey-Coste, the editor-in-chief at Climate Action Now, will be speaking with our expert guest speaker, Daan Walter. Sam authors the Dose of Climate Hope Substack newsletter for Climate Action Now. Dose of Climate Hope illustrates new technologies, policy solutions, people, and trends that give us reason to be hopeful about the climate. Daan Walter is a leading energy strategist who forecasts the rapid growth of Electrotech. As a principal at Ember, Daan leads strategy research on the Electrotech Revolution and analyzes how these breakthroughs are transforming markets, security, and climate progress worldwide. Before joining Ember, Daan served as a principal at RMI, where he directed global energy strategy research into batteries, efficiency, and mineral demand. Earlier in his career at McKinsey & Company, he co-founded and led the sustainability analytics team, which advised governments and Fortune 500 companies on navigating the energy transition. Daan holds graduate degrees in nuclear energy and theoretical physics from the University of Cambridge and a bachelor's degree in physics and astronomy from the University of Amsterdam. We'll now transition into our live interview. As you hear from Daan and Sam, please type any questions you have for the discussion into the chat. Over to you, Sam.
So, Daan, you are one of the world's leading experts, I think it's fair to say at this point, on the incredible wave of grid-scale battery storage we're seeing that is absolutely transforming world energy markets. And your recent report, Silos for Sunshine, is one of the best and most encouraging things I've read this year, because it points out that similar to how just grain silos made the agricultural revolution be able to sustain higher human populations, batteries are like silos for clean electrons. We now have, as Bill McKibben loves to say, magic sheets of glass that you can point at the sun to get free energy. And batteries mean that we can now use that solar power all year round at night and use it to just electrify our entire civilization. The fact that solar and batteries are both rising together is just setting off this incredible virtuous cycle economically and technologically that you very well documented. So I think that a lot of people, like I still sometimes see, and it's really shocking, so much of the progress on battery technology has happened in the 2020s. Like so much has changed so very, very recently. Someone who's not an expert on this and whose worldview is maybe stuck like even 5 years ago, especially if it's 10 years ago, could easily be like, ah, well, batteries kind of finicky. But no, like batteries and solar are now the vast majority of all new power generating capacity being built worldwide. It's already like dominant in everything that's getting new built. It's clearly on track to take over the world essentially. So could you just say from the top for someone who maybe has just tuned out of energy policy and technology news for the last decade, and it's been a busy decade, so that's very understandable. Um, what should people know about batteries that is different now than it was 10 years ago? That's obviously a huge question, but roll with it.
No, super, and thanks for having me, Sam, and everyone. Excited to be part of this. So batteries are the big game changer in the energy transition today. If we just think about, like, let's do this sort of 10 years ago example, we go back to 2015, we're talking about batteries being a niche technology, providing electric vehicles that are more expensive and have lower performance. We're talking about storing electricity on the grid, which is just more expensive than any peaker gas plant you can imagine. We're talking about a solution that's incredibly niche. And really, the only sector where batteries are really booming is just in consumer electronics, right? It's smartphones and laptops and things like that. So logically, we're thinking about batteries in 2015 much more in the way of this is a consumer electronics market with a niche market for maybe high-end electric vehicles. Your Teslas, right? Cool, muscular Tesla cars. That's maybe where batteries are going. Now, over the past decade, production scaled up dramatically. Partially, by the way, also still driven by electronics, but increasingly by electric vehicles. And so, as batteries became battery factories became larger and larger, you got these economies of scale, and that's why battery prices dropped. According to like this predictable pattern that we've seen in history, like the more you build of something, the better you start understanding how to make it, and the cheaper the cost become. This is the called Wright's law, right? And so over time, batteries became cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper until we hit like the miraculous moments over the past, I would say even 18 months now. So it's really, even if you're 18 months old on your knowledge, you're probably outdated on what has happened. Because over the past 18 months, we've now seen conclusively that electric vehicles are cheaper than combustion engines, so gas cars to run. Conclusively cheaper across the world. Sure, there's still markets where it's more expensive, there are tariffs that distort the picture, but just based on a first principles production cost view, it is cheaper now to make an electric vehicle than it is to make a gas car. We've also seen peakers being forced out of the market, gas peakers being forced out of the market by battery prices. So basically, we're seeing all of these different battery applications suddenly coming into money and a complete turnaround in how batteries can be used in the system.
And part of the reason I think that this is underrated in the US is because we have a very large domestic fossil fuel industry that has a truly woeful level of influence on our politics. And the US is, contrary to the last several technological revolutions, really behind the curve on this one. A lot of those battery factories and a lot of that's innovation, really the majority of it is happening in China. And like electric vehicles are something like 10% of the US market now. They're now over 50% of the Chinese market. More than half of all new cars being sold in China are battery electric. And China's, the world's largest car market. And the rest of the world increasingly is following that battery-led path rather than doubling down on fossil fuels where you have to keep buying more stuff. If you go with batteries, once you own the battery, you can keep filling it up with free electrons from solar or wind. You're not reliant on imports. So the US is really an outlier in a sense in this global battery revolution.
It is, but it's interesting. It's also its origin. It's the batteries are sort of the one that got away for the United States innovation system, right? It's like
Yeah.
in the 70s, in the oil crisis of the 70s, that's the origin period of the modern battery. It's actually ExxonMobil R&D departments that come up with the first lithium-ion battery, but cast it
Not good
aside
enough.
as something that is not that interesting. And so it's only like sort of this technology starts floating around the world until in Japan they pick it up for the Sony camcorder, and then you have the whole consumer electronics revolution that actually drives the scale to get battery prices down from really incredibly high prices to more manageable prices for consumer electronics around the 2000s. So it's been a long way coming, this battery technology. We're talking about decades and decades, but it actually, funnily enough, the origins lie within here, within the United States. It's just that no one really picked up this technology and ran with it. No one really, until we actually now saw China picking it up as a serious, not just consumer electronics, but as a serious energy technology in China. And they made that scale up and they made this happen. But this was not destined to be China. It was actually very much an American technology by and for Americans, but we let it slip.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, like there have been really for the last 30 years on energy policy has been a history of people proposing sort of forward-thinking investments in clean energy and then having them shot down or rolled back and in the US. And China has managed Akshat Rathi has a great piece about this in his book Climate Capitalism. A Chinese battery engineer, actually, a guy called Wan Gang, did like a PowerPoint presentation in the year 2000 to the Chinese leadership. And he's like, look, batteries barely being explored. We should invest a lot in this. We'd be able to not spend so much on foreign oil. And then China just spent lots of money on it for the next 25 years. And now they're leading the world on that. And the US just has been constantly fighting about that due to entrenched fossil fuel interests and stuff. And but so yeah, it is the one we got away. The US took batteries from 0 to 1, and now China's kind of taken them from 1 to 100.
Yes, I fully agree. I do have to say I think it's a dual issue that we face in the US or in the West in general on why our conversation or why we don't seem to be picking up on these new pieces of electrotech. And it's the way that we see the energy conversation playing out today is in this very polarized fashion, where on one hand we have sort of the fossil framing of the energy, which is we kind of figured out the optimal way to organize the energy system around like 1950, and that's fossil fuels, and renewables are only going to be expensive and only come on top. And that has been one, that's exactly in that framing. Also, ExxonMobil let go of the battery because who cares? Fossils are the sort of the pinnacle of human invention. That's where the future will be. Um, I think on the other side, that's of course much more dominant since the 90s, is sort of the climate view on the energy system. But it's really a more the technocratic climate view, I would say, like sort of the energy system as a problem to be solved rather than an opportunity for growth and opportunity for economic growth. And that second framing has also not been very helpful. And it's one of the reasons why, for instance, China has been so good at recognizing these new pieces of electrotech and the West has not. Because if you just focus on where can I cut carbon over the next 18 months, you might miss where you're going to cut carbon over the next 18 years. And when you look at long-term economics and you look at long-term profitability of these technologies, it was kind of clear around, in the 2000s that batteries would one day get to the point where they are today. It's just learning rates going through and through. But those are A, long-term investments, and B, they're economics focused and they're not focused on carbon reduction in the short term. And so China sat there exactly in the middle. They didn't have really have fossil fuels, so their lobby on fossil fuels was small, but they also didn't have a huge climate lobby. So they were kind of a little bit more free to make long-term bets in their energy system. And those are really now paying off for China. That's why I think China is on track to do so well, is because they recognized quite early on that besides the climate benefit of electrotech, there are just three huge benefits of deploying electrotech, which is just more efficient, it is cheaper and only getting cheaper, and it gives you independence from importing fossil fuels. And so those three benefits itself are great.
This is something I'm really trying to emphasize a lot in my writing. If climate change wasn't a thing, if obliging aliens or mutant phytoplankton soaked up all the extra CO2 and we had 0 degrees of warming and everything was perfectly stable in the biosphere, you would still want to massively transition to solar energy and batteries just because it has so many other benefits. Air pollution alone, not carbon dioxide, but soots like nitrogen oxides, all the other crap that fossil fuels emit,
Yeah.
gets rid of all of that. That saves millions of lives per year worldwide. And also, like you said, the economic advantage is unbelievable. Like there was a recent study by Carbon Reef, like one shipload, one container ship full of solar panels will, over the lifetime of those solar panels, generate as much energy as 100 container ships full of coal. It's just way more efficient to sort of farm energy instead of hunt energy, as you sort of have put in your great sort of agricultural revolution metaphor. We're used to sort of a hunter-gatherer model of energy production where we go out, find big, rich deposits of fossil fuels somewhere, and go stab it and bring it home. And we're really moving to farming the sun, like having fields of stable production where you can just put stuff up anywhere and have a renewable, reliable energy source. And like I'm just gonna pull up your report now because it has some really beautiful graphs that I really love and I've tried to use and link to in site whenever any chance I get. And fundamentally, if you want a long-term, like really advanced future for human civilization, renewables or your only shot, or renewables or
Yes.
nuclear, but renewables are now much cheaper than nuclear because as you say in your report, the sun supplies more energy to Earth every 5 days than all fossil fuel reserves could supply for the rest of time. And
Yes.
of course, we're not harvesting all of that. That's if you pave the Earth in solar panels, but even a fraction of that is just clearly much better.
And by the way, Sam, as you mentioned nuclear, if we would add nuclear to the top, that would probably be every 6 days you match it. And that's all nuclear reserves combined on top. So also,
Yeah.
even if you add nuclear on top, there's no match for the power of the sun.
Yeah, yeah. Well, oh, yeah, I'm in favor of nuclear. I'm in favor of the big nuclear fusion reactor conveniently parked 1 astronomical unit away. Like we have, like nuclear is much safer than people give it credit for, but by now it's sort of old news. Like it would have been a big improvement on coal in the 70s, but now we have something much better.
Exactly. Yes.
And
Yeah.
and that, and that's a man with a doctorate in nuclear science saying that. So yeah, so you are an expert.
No, so this is true. It's the amount of energy that we receive from the sun. It's just very, very tremendous. And it's the other component is that so as it shows here, right? It's more immediate, it's more abundant. The one thing that it's not showing on here is that it's more spread out. It is like in tech right now, right? When I travel up and down to San Francisco, the big celebration or the big excitement that people have is like Starlink, because now you can solve the last mile problem with Starlink because you can get internet all across the world. How exciting. And that is very, very exciting. People don't realize that we already have a Starlink for energy. It's called the sun, and it comes by every, 12 hours. And the only thing you need to do is you need to put this fancy sort of satellite out. It's called a solar panel. You receive the sunlight, you put a battery there so you can store it for the evening, and that's how you solve the last mile problem for those, hundreds of thousands, hundreds of millions of people that don't have access to electricity, where it's way too expensive at the moment to draw those long power lines out to remote communities. They have a energy Starlink. It's called solar power. And this is, I think, just again, something that we don't really appreciate, that what a benefit it is that solar power, that the sun shines on us all, that really is a great benefit to the system because it lowers all of these issues that we've been struggling with since, the early 1900s of rolling out electricity to people to give them prosperity.
And this has immense potential to really finish the job on uplifting humanity from extreme poverty. There's still 600 million people on Earth that don't have any electricity access at all, and those tend to be the same people who have the highest rates of death from preventable diseases and illiteracy, all sort of ancient ills. And most of those people live in sub-Saharan Africa, which conveniently is one of the sunniest places on Earth. We have hundreds of millions of the poorest people in the world living in a place that's perfect for solar power. And we are starting to see just the beginning. I've written a lot about this. I've interviewed people on this. Just the beginning of an exponential growth in solar adoption in Africa that could transform the lives of millions of people. Like the humanitarian benefit to this is incredible because the fossil fuel system has failed those people in Africa for the last 60 years. There are still hundreds of millions of people without electricity decades and decades after we know how to get electricity from fossil fuels. But solar power works everywhere.
Yes, and that's also because of the simple economics of it. Fossil fuels are quite expensive, and even, of course, made even more expensive by the fact that there's a global cartel that extorts the global energy community for prices. That, of course, makes it even worse. But it's expensive. Like, think about LNG, right? LNG is a very, very premium fuel. And there's this narrative now taking shape of like, oh, LNG is a new growth market where the global south will be able to adopt LNG to grow their economies in emerging markets. But it's just incredibly expensive. And so how can you imagine pricing in emerging markets where people don't have enough money for basic food and basic services in many regions and suddenly sell them this most expensive energy known to mankind, which is effectively LNG. Maybe nuclear is a little bit more expensive, but LNG really is it's caviar for the hungry, right? It's this idea that we're going to solve energy poverty with something very, very expensive. Solar is turning it on its head, right? Because it's actually now the cheapest energy available. And together with batteries, and we have some ongoing analysis that will launch early next year, we can now see that across regions like in Africa and Latin America, you can easily get 85 to 90% uptime with solar plus battery. And so you only need a very, very small amount of backup to provide power full time. And that's already 85 to 90% uptime is already better than most grids have in emerging economies in terms of uptime, because the grid is also not always on. That also drops out. So there's this tremendous leapfrogging opportunity here for emerging economies to go straight to the final technology and create this energy abundance locally in their countries rather than try to claw their way up in a very, very expensive fossil market.
Yeah, like at this point, like kind of no matter what you want to do, if you can read the data, unless you are actively being paid by the fossil fuel industry, all roads lead to renewables. Like even Saudi Arabia is building tons of renewables now. No matter what your goals are, like national autonomy, saving money, defense, like no matter what you're trying to do for your country or your company or your family, renewables are the best way to get cheap electricity, which is probably the best way to do that. If you're a country trying to limit your reliance on importing fossil fuels or exposure to price volatility, the answer is solar and batteries. If you're trying to get electricity to poor people in the cheapest way possible, the answer is solar and batteries. If you're trying to if you're trying to decarbonize, the answer is solar and batteries. If you're just completely just going for the cheapest option, the answer is solar and batteries. We are at this incredible point where it's a win, 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 win.
Exactly. And the ceiling of the possible is so high, right? That's, I think, another thing that people underappreciate. Like when you hear people arguing against solar and against the solar plus battery system, it's like, yeah, but there will be days where your battery is empty and the sun is gone. And so you will not get to 100% decarbonization because you still need to run backup. But that's kind of like a moot argument. It's like kind of saying the automotive is not going to happen because yeah, you tried it now with the Ford Model T in New York City, but how about the mountains out all the way out in Colorado? You can't drive there, so therefore the revolution won't happen. Like these are like it's a disruptive technology revolution. It starts small in small niche markets and it starts expanding from there. And what we're seeing at the moment is that you know. 20 years ago, you could maybe electrify 30% of the global economy with the technologies that we had available. Today, it's more than 75% because these technologies keep getting better and better and cheaper and cheaper. And so it spreads from a kernel of kind of disruptive market kernel to the whole economy. And that's what we're seeing taking shape now, also with batteries. It started all the way back then. It's Sony camcorders. That was like the start of the battery revolution globally. And it's now keeps spreading. And it's kind of like this domino effect where it goes from one sector to the other. And every time it goes to a new sort of, it's almost like a viral thing, right? It jumps to a new sector. It mutates into a new, better technology such that it can jump to yet another sector. And so this sort of this battery virus in this analogy is kind of like spreading across all of these sectors and slowly spreading across the economy. And so it's a very exciting time. And it's understandable also, I think we all have to say, like we all probably also here on the call all try to get updated on what's happening in this space. But if you don't, it is incredibly hard to understand just over the last 18 months, last 5 years, last 10 years, how much has happened and how fast things are moving.
If you talk like yeah, and like you said, the potential is incredible. Like pretty much our entire energy system for decades has been based on fossil fuels, which are hydrocarbons, right? Long chains of carbon and hydrogen atoms. And one great way of looking at this is that after like centuries now of building everything on carbon and hydrogen atoms, we're now exploring the rest of the periodic table for our energy. Like we have like silicon and solar panels and like batteries using sodium and lithium and tons and tons and tons of other stuff. And this just an incredibly huge, vast possibility space to explore. We're just at the beginning.
I love that. Exactly this, right? It's
Yeah.
if you work in a carbon space, you basically your innovation is in one dimension, which is how long of a carbon chain are you talking about? So it's a one-dimensional kind of problem. If you talk about batteries, and you talk about all these innovations going on in the electrochemical space, we're talking about 100,000 million dimensional spaces where there's just so many permutations possible of different batteries, different solar panels, different ways to create magnets and magnetic materials. And this is also why innovation is going quite fast, right? It's the combination of not just having small modular technologies where you can experiment a lot, because a rock is all like a pebble is also smaller modular, but there's not a lot of innovation one can do with it because it doesn't have a lot of sort of degrees of freedom. It needs to be a pebble, it needs to be a certain size, it needs to be hard. Now that's kind of it. But with a battery or with a solar panel, there's so many billions and billions of uncountable variations in which you can make these systems work that being small modular is a big benefit because you can explore your solution space much faster. And this is very differentiating between Electrotech, successful Electrotech, and other technologies out there. Is that because they're so small and modular, that's one, but also because their solution space is so huge, two, that's how you get that sort of rapid innovation.
So,
And
Sam,
it
do you
is
mind?
rapid.
Sorry, Sam, do you mind if I jump in
Sure,
and,
go ahead.
and ask a question? Um,
And just for the record, for viewers, Brett Walter and Dan Walter are no relation. We have two Mr. Walters, but they are different,
Maybe way back when, yeah.
Yeah.
he's had my name for longer, so I'm going to be sending you a licensing agreement. On the other hand, I'm going to waive it because you're so far ahead of me on this energy stuff. Yeah, I heard recently, and I don't know where it was, Dan. Maybe it was Jiggershaw, or maybe it was on Cleaning Up with Mike Liebrick and your colleague Bryony, that you ain't seen nothing yet with respect to innovation in batteries. Okay, and this is relevant to what you were just talking about. You were kind of giving us the conceptual understanding of why innovation is happening there, where it's not happening with fossil fuels. But could you kind of open up your crystal ball for us and say what's ahead of us? What do we look at And I'll just add one thing. When I'm following energy tech, every time there's a new battery this, a new battery that. But I don't hear that with solar panels so much. There's
Um,
the so talk to us about, what's the future of technology with these systems, and will we continue to see a learning curve with all of these renewables, or is it gonna flatten out? Thanks.
So continued learning is to be expected. One has to think of what component of the total cost that we finally see is actually reducing in cost. So let's first do on innovation, and then we can talk about the cost picture sort of. Innovation, I mean, there are also, if you follow, for instance, the PV magazine news flash reporting, there are
I
also
love
so
PV
many,
magazine.
they're so
Yeah,
good. And they
there are
have
tons
like
of innovations in solar.
great, from perovskite to gallium to all kinds of different setups and configurations, and bifacial, and then even now there are like lots of these experiments of how you orient the solar panel. That in of itself can already be, a different yield. If you make a solar panel perfectly aimed towards the sun, you get, of course, the peak in the middle of the day. But you can also put it entirely vertical, so you get the morning hours, and so you get very good morning solar. So you can kind of imagine having different angles for different solar panels. This is all innovation that's happening to kind of optimize how much energy we can get out of the sun. To not even talk of course, about all the chemical innovations and things that are going on in there. So we are going to see a continued learning rate as the death on the solar learning rate and the battery learning rate have been called multiple times over the past decade, 2 decades, and time and again there's yet another innovation that forces a breakthrough. So things will become even cheaper and performance will be even higher. Of course, in terms of what it means to us for a consumer, compared to sort of your 2005 battery cost, today's costs are effectively zero, right? So it's already so cheap compared to what it was back then that, the additional 20 to 30% cost reduction is not going to mean that much to us because it's already so competitive. So in terms of where we're going to see the huge differences being made in terms of competitiveness, it might not be that the actual battery cell or the actual solar panel cost reduction is going to mean that much to us because they by now are such a small part of the total cost. What is going to be probably the biggest innovation that we need to wait for is actually not technological, but it's business model wise. It's how do we take these technologies and somehow sort of tape them together in a good way, set up a good governance model as society on how to leverage these systems, how to orient our solar panels, how to price power prices to fairly reflect the value that a battery can add to the grid. That's, I think, where we are going to get most of our value. Because as with any of these disruptive technologies, whether that be, disk drives or transistors, all the other disruptive technologies that we've seen in history, they never come as a plug and play solution. They always force the system to change. And so what we now see is that they're cheap enough to compete. The next thing is that they're going to be, abundant and cheap enough to force change in the system. And I think that's where we're going to see most of the benefits of over the past 5 years, over the next 5 years. I think we'll look back by 2030 and not so much look back over the past 5 years as so much cost reduction has been such a breakthrough because we're already at cost break even. It's already cheaper. I think we're going to look back and be like, wow, we didn't realize how to actually package this product and sell it in a good way. I think that's going to be the biggest breakthrough that we should expect.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that we really try to act on Climate Action Now as well. Like we often have actions at this federal, state, and local permitting level because often these new technologies in places like Pakistan are building vast amounts of solar in part because it's unregulated. People can just buy solar, plug it in, put it up. And in places like the US, you have to deal with your federal, state, grid interconnection, homeowner association, tons of different stuff that's potentially blocking you from getting your own home solar and batteries. So a lot of it is a lot of it is the soft costs. Like reports are showing now, like in the US, like the technology itself of solar is like less than 25% of the cost of getting a rooftop solar system in the US because most of the cost is filing the application and paying the electrician to plug it in because it can only be installed by a registered electrician and all the extra sort of red tape stuff like that.
Yeah, and this is why the energy transition story, I think, has transitioned over the past couple of years from a push to a pull story, right? So we used to push this big boulder up the hill to get these technologies to cost parity. Now they're there and the boulder will roll down on the other side of the hill. And now it's a question of us keeping up. It's sort of Indiana Jones being chased by the boulder, right? Now it's a question of can we actually keep up with the pace of change? Because if we are too slow, There are many other countries in the world, and obviously looking at China, but don't count out India, don't count out Vietnam. They're making tremendous strides to leapfrog the West. And this is what we're seeing happening in the data live today. This is not forecast. This is right now on the ground. We're seeing that 63% of emerging markets have overtaken the United States in terms of solar uptake, right? Share of electricity they're getting from solar, 63%. A quarter of
Places like
emerging
the Philippines.
markets are.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys?
Yeah, like places like the Philippines now get more of their power from solar than we do. Like the US has really held itself back woefully on this.
Yes, it's the and this is I think what I would say. This is the boulder rolling, right? This is the boulder rolling down. Now the economics are on the side of these new pieces of Electrotech. It is going by itself, and so the question is no longer. Also, if you're very anti-solar, there's no question here of like, should we still subsidize? Should we still like do this? It's kind of like it's happening. You now need to respond to it. You now need to make sure that the bolt, that you at least are faster than the boulder, because it is energy. Energy underlies all the competitiveness metrics in the world. Like you are competitive, countries are competitive because they have cheap energy. And if we don't run along with the boulder, if we don't surf this wave, to use a different analogy, we will just be dragged along with it.
So Dan, if I could push back a little bit on your, I mean, I totally agree with you that we need financing innovation, in order to utilize the new technology and stuff. But I'm not sure that we don't. I mean, I guess you're not saying we don't need more innovation, but let me give a specific example that is going to be really pertinent to our audience. Let's take electric vehicles. Okay, both my sisters have bought hybrids because they are worried about range anxiety. I mean, every time I talk to somebody, I say, no, no, don't worry about it. When's the last time you went on a 600-mile trip? But no, they do. This is real. People worry about range anxiety. So don't we need more battery tech so that once you've got a 600-mile charge in your car, that drives a stake in that issue, doesn't it?
No, 100%, right? So I think when I say we have the technologies, I don't think I think to be precise, I don't mean we have the technologies the technology we have today. We have the groups of technologies and the innovation paths that we can walk down on. And so if we tomorrow stop with the end use subsidies for these things, companies are smelling blood. They're smelling that there's opportunity here, right? Even in modern Trump economy in the United States, GM is still saying we're all in on electric. They're not doing that to somehow still, talk towards the Democrats or somehow be recalcitrant towards Trump. They're looking at the numbers. They're seeing a good business model here, but they might not see it for 100% of EVs right now. They might see it maybe for a 25% to 30% EV sales today. But what they're also looking at is I see the pathway from the batteries that we have today, a logical pathway how we can get from this to a battery that is again 3 to 4 times the range of that we have today. I can credibly see that from my labs all the way to my production line taking shape. And so I'm already going to take a decadal bet on, triggering those very expensive designs for new electric vehicles to make sure that those new production lines are being built up. So it's not so much that we say we can freeze technology today and with that we can solve it all, but we now see a credible pathway in the same way that when we think about artificial intelligence, like I think we all can start to see a credible pathway how artificial intelligence can, for instance, do a lot of translating jobs, right? Is it there already? Is it 100%? No, but we can credibly see how you can probably get a large part of the translation industry converted into artificial intelligence. I think this is the same way that we should think about electrotech. It is not so much that the AI today or the electrotech today can solve all of these issues, but we see a credible pathway how retooling with it and how innovating on it will get us there.
That's a really great point. And I really agree with that, Dan, because it's just incredibly clear where the direction of travel is. Like we have squeezed all the juice of improvements in fossil fuel efficiency, so to speak. People have been iterating on better drilling methods and engines for decades, and we're just getting started in batteries, and batteries are already cheaper. Like you're saying, it is very clear where the direction of travel is.
Yeah, and it's an annoying thing for the fossil tech ecosystem, I would say, is like fossil fuels you need to dig up. And so you can innovate on how you get stuff from the ground, but that's oftentimes if you can, realize a 10% improvement on cost on drilling for oil, that's typically offset by the fact that you have to drill 20% deeper. And so on the whole, when you look over the past 100, 125 years, the oil prices, for instance, they've roughly oscillated around the same price, right? I mean, up and down, especially in the oil crisis, it spiked, and we're talking about it going up, but never at order of magnitude differences because of the innovations that we see happening. This is
But we've
different, of
already
course, than
seen
solar batteries.
yeah. But we've already seen multiple order of magnitude decreases for solar and batteries, like you were about to say. Sorry, go ahead.
Exactly. It's just the past 5 decades, past 50 years. We're seeing like I think it's like 5 orders of magnitude cost decline of solar panels. This is just crazy, crazy numbers, and that's because it's fuelless. It's fueled by the sun, and so you don't have this issue that the more you want to build, the deeper you need to dig. You don't have that issue. So you get this very nice sort of smooth technology learning curve that directly translates into your prices getting lower. Whilst in the fossil fuel sector, you also have technology learning rates. They're only offset by the fact that you need to start digging deeper and in more tricky locations, etc. And so on the whole, you don't get structural deflationary pressures from fossil fuels. And you will get that with Electrotech.
Yeah, because fundamentally, like this is this is all toning towards energy too cheap to meter. Like Australia just invoked just announced plans for a solar share program where they'll make electricity free for 3 hours in the middle of the day, starting in some states in 2026. Like, and that's even better than it looks because not only do you get 3 hours of free electricity, a lot of people in Australia have home batteries, and you can fill those up during the 3 hours and then run your house for the rest of the day on electricity that you got for free. And in China, like in the US, people are like, oh, data centers, they use too much electricity. China's building so much more electricity than the US now. China's solar capacity alone is getting close to overtaking US capacity from all sources of power, including solar and gas and coal and everything. Um, that China's
Yeah.
now reportedly views data centers as a useful power sink. Like all these places where we have so much power and we haven't built out power lines yet, so it's getting wasted. Let's build data centers there. Like we are getting to the point where in jurisdictions smart enough to build clean energy, which sadly does not include the federal US government at the moment, electricity just becomes ridiculously abundant. And there's so much you can do with that. Like
Mm-hmm.
some of the very early things I've seen are like desalination, desalinating ocean drinking water. Drinking water from the ocean suddenly becomes cost effective when electricity is nearly free. You could install huge air purifiers in cities to screen for viruses, little UV lights over every doorstep to screen for viruses, and maybe eradicate the common cold. You could do so many incredible things with a huge flood of electricity. It could power like carbon dioxide removal from the atmosphere, which so far has been pretty cost prohibitive at scale. It could it could do so many incredibly cool things.
Energy is awesome, and I think we
Yeah.
we also as a myself also having worked quite a few years, and I suppose still are in the climate movement, is that we should avoid being one track minded on carbon here, or rather say carbon is a very very valiant reason to pursue this, but there's so much more why energy is awesome, and there's so much more that we can do with it, and it's an
This is bigger
opportunity.
than climate change. The Electrotech Revolution is a bigger deal than climate change. Like, I suspect that someday, 1,000 years from now, people will be like, ah, yes, climate change. That was one of the reasons people got interested in solar power. Like, this is a
Yeah.
huge, gigantic thing that will echo through millennia, being able to access solar and battery technology.
And it's one of the few technologies, like if we're talking far, far future, it's another nice realization that you have. Like when we invented agriculture, right, it allowed us to actually stay in parts of the world where you couldn't stay as a hunter-gatherer. So it gave us more space to live. The same is obviously true when we're talking about solar panels. Like if we want to go multi-planetary or whatever the latest tech talk is, the only energy source you're going to find on Mars is the sun. So the only way you're going to set up a Mars colony society credibly is with solar power. You're not going to ship fuels over. It'd be a pretty absurd kind of Star Trek future if we are going to basically use the current Earth that we have to extract the fossil fuels from and ship it all over the universe for people to use. It is the only way for humanity to also really think about a horizon, not just of avoiding climate change over the next 100 years, but for us to really prosper as humans over the next 1,000 years. And that has to go through solar. And that's the only credible way that we have to scale up.
So Dan, if I can jump in again, I want to get some of the questions from our audience. Dave Girk is asking, is solar leaving wind power behind, or will wind continue to play an important role in energy transition? And before you answer that, let's kind of broaden the scope a bit. Let's take the major renewable sectors. What's your crystal ball? What's going to happen with solar, with wind, with batteries, with geothermal? We haven't talked about geothermal at all. Big article in the journal today about big investment just went into Fervo to build out their thing in Utah. So what's Embers and your forecast here for these? And is there a clear winner? Is it solar and batteries? Is that really it, or how does it all play together?
So solar is going to walk away with the largest share of the pie here, and that's mainly by virtue of the fact that 80% of the global population lives in this like this solar belt across the world, where you can get increasingly just almost 24/7 power with solar and batteries. We're talking about being 95% uptime, 90% uptime at competitive cost. So 80% of the global population will obviously try to use that as much as they can. Um, Not all parts of the world, specifically Northern Europe, is left out in the cold on that one. And so that's, I think, where I still expect large parts of the wind industry to focus on. There's going to be a big boom continuing, I suspect, in Northern Europe, simply by the virtue that they're too high up on the earth to get proper solar. So wind's market is being eaten to some extent in the solar belt, but still don't count out the wind industry. There's a lot of energy demand in Northern Europe. And by the way, there is always a good argument to say wind and solar complement each other, right? On a rainy day, it's typically windy with clouds and vice versa. So there's still good arguments, even in the solar belt, to build wind because it's a natural backup complement to solar. So I think that they're going to work in part in tandem, but solar is going to run away, at least in the way that I see it over the next decade. They're going to run away with the majority of growth. And this is exactly what we've seen happening over the past couple of years. Wind outlooks adjusted downwards and solar outlooks adjusted upwards by the same amount, if not more.
And what about
Yeah,
geothermal? Let's talk about geothermal a bit.
Geothermal is very interesting. So when we first when we set our sights on the future of power, we need to think of like, okay, what are the clear winners now? It's going to be wind and solar. That's variable generation, and then batteries will sort of back it up. What can we not do with that? That leaves us with probably at the end of the time, like maybe 85 to 95% of the year we can do with wind, solar, and battery backup. That leaves us with roughly 5 to 15% that we need to do something else with. Now, what do you want there? What kind of capacity do you want to have to fill in that last bit? You want preferably actually, you want something that is low investment, high operating cost, rather than the other way around. Why do you want to have it this way? It's because if I need to spend a lot of money up front, I want to run my machine as much as I can to get my money's worth out of it. And so if you have technologies, and unfortunately geothermal is also part of that group of technologies that are capital intensive. They're low running costs. Nuclear is the same. It's low running cost, but a high capital cost. That's always economically going to be a hard match for a dominant wind and solar system. Basically by the virtue of the fact that you're only going to be able to run for 5 to 10% of the year. So when you hear like a new nuclear cost being announced of like, oh, maybe we can do it for maybe $120 per megawatt hour, that is typically assuming that you're going to run 80% of the year. But if you want to build nuclear as backup, you're only going to be running it for 5% of the year. And so the cost will actually be, the levelized cost of the plant will more be like 500, if not $5,000 per megawatt hour of running this plant. And so that's very expensive. And so the thing for a geothermal is the same I think topic. If you want to be a scalable solution as backup for wind and solar, you need to work on your capital cost. If you get that down, and there are credible pathways here again for geothermal to do that, I think more so than for nuclear, there are credible pathways. You can be a great complement to wind and solar. But as it stands today, and as the technology are today, the economics just don't really work. They kind of clash. And so you'd much rather focus on expensive backup solutions that don't cost anything when you don't run them because they're low capital cost.
But what's an example of that? Are we talking fossil fuels?
Yeah, so at the moment, the easiest way to, of course, get backup is an open cycle turbine or even a diesel gen kit. That is a perfect complement to a solar panel and a battery. You use that for, well, if we think about, for instance, the Masdar project in the Middle East, we're talking about 99.6% uptime, and then that 0.4% you run a diesel generator to just make sure that the data center that's being built there, the base load, doesn't drop out. It's a very, very small amount of emissions, a very small amount of fossil fuel use. And let's face it, as this market will grow, as more people will start looking for backup, we'll find alternative solutions to these fuels. But something cheap upfront and expensive in the long term, like it could even imagine like some sort of a hydrogen or something like that as a backup is probably economically a better match than a capex heavy technology like geothermal that you're not going to use except for 5% a year.
But as you've been saying, we're already at a point where like 80 to 90% of all electricity demand at all time can be met by solar and batteries. Like we are arguing about the last 15 to the last like 5 to 15% of stuff that will need to be replaced for those few times of the year when we have like 3 weeks of cloudy days in a row or something.
Exactly.
This is like people are still fighting over sort of the last mile here, and just based on how much progress we're seeing in batteries, geothermal, so much else, I'm pretty sure we'll figure it out when we get there. Like we already have most of the world system that we can clearly power with clean electricity now.
Well, I mean, so we get solar and battery wind. They give us 95%, let's say, of what most of the world needs most of the time. That remaining 5% is still super important. People don't want to not have power, 5% of the day, right? And this is
Yeah,
the reason why the fossil fuel industry says, oh, renewables doesn't solve the problem, right? You need fossil fuels because only really fossil fuels can do this for us. So we have to kind of really, that's a tough nut. We really do have to crack that nut, don't we?
I
So
really
to
don't.
some extent,
Yeah,
yeah.
go ahead.
So maybe two stories here. One is the story in emerging economies. In emerging economies, having 95% uptime on your grid, well, especially for the people that have no power now, but even you have 600 million people not power, but probably another billion people that have, uptimes of electricity grids that are at 95% or below. So already it's an upgrade for those people as well. And it's actually more predictable because at least, it's a sunny day, so I will have power rather than today the utility decided to cut off my region in a brownout episode. So there you're already sort of breaking even in terms of the service that you provide. And then the last 5% in terms of you need to build the fossil system. Like fossil fuels, fossil power is expensive because you need to because you need to extract the fuels, because the fuels are expensive. It's not because the capacity to burn the fuels is quite expensive. So it is actually not going to be, it's actually cheaper. So we did this analysis earlier this year. It's actually cheaper. If you, for instance, look at a plant in the south of the UK, you can get up to like 60% solar plus battery integration. Even if you keep your gas plant online, that's going to be cheaper than running your gas plant all the time. Why? Because when the sun shines, you don't need to buy expensive gas. And when you use your battery backup for the hours that it's still full, you don't need to buy expensive gas. And so you can avoid a lot of expensive fossil fuels. And that is the main driver of cost in electricity today. So from an economics point of view, you get to that 95%. You still have that last 5%, indeed, for sure. But that's actually the economical solution to get there. And then how we feel in the last 5%, then we can start thinking about carbon prices and other ways to sort of innovate out that last 5% of emissions.
So there is no renewable technology per se that will do the 5% with low upfront cost and high operating costs. There's no such thing, right? Currently.
No, well, I mean, we do have stuff that can do that. We do have sources of 24/7 baseload power. We could do this stuff like pumped storage, where you sort of use renewable energy to pump water uphill, and then it goes back down and turns a turbine. There are options for that. It's just a question of whether they're cheaper than fossil fuels yet. I think that you're kind of almost underselling, Brett, just how impressive it is where we are now, because we are already at the point where for 95% of the electricity system, it is cheaper to just switch to solar and batteries all the time. And we have stuff that could do that other 5%, like enhanced geothermal, pumped hydro, potentially just lots of hydrogen electrolyzers and then burn the hydrogen. But it's just more expensive than fossil fuels yet. It's just a 5% left, not that we can't do, but where fossil fuels are still cheaper.
Well, if Dan is right, he probably is. It sounds to me like if you just let the economics play out, where we're going to end up is solar and batteries, mostly wind, depending on geography. And it sounds to me like we're probably going to still be relying on fossil fuels for the last 5%. That is barring any policy interventions like carbon taxes and whatnot. You're nodding, is that right? I mean, is that sort of your perspective, Dan?
Yeah, so if we kind of do a hands-off approach, that's logically where we'll end up. And so you also, of course, electrify on top. So you get rid of all the oil that goes into cars, into the heating system, because you put heat pumps and EVs in. So you're basically, for instance, if we do the emission maths, you get to like 34 gigatons turns into mostly electrified, and then that electrified is still 5% fossil, so 33 turns into something like 3 gigatons, 4 gigatons. So that's kind of the order of magnitude emission reduction that we can count on. Now, maybe we can't electrify everything because there's some cement emissions, so let's call it like an even 5 to 7 gigatons left. That is kind of like locked in with this transition, and the only thing with the Electrotech Revolution to do is, of course, play on speed, because we're in a climate hurry, so we play on speed to hurry this up. But that's the natural thing that's going to happen.
Okay,
Then
so
the
if that
last bit there,
happens, Dan, if that happens, if you guys mulled out, what happens to global temperatures at that point? Is that enough? I mean, if we can do that and we're only relying on fossil fuels for the last 5%, are we going to start to see a decline in carbon in the atmosphere, or what happens?
it depends on how fast, of course. So that's of course the question. It's about how fast can the Electrotech revolution go. The way that we see it at the current trend that we're going, this is a Paris aligned scenario in terms of it's below 2 degrees Celsius. We're seeing 1.7, 1.8 degrees currently being sort of the realistic pathway that we're on. Obviously, in the long term, if we want to stop climate change, we need to stop adding net carbon into the atmosphere. So obviously, in the long term, we're talking post 2050, we need to get to net zero in the end. But in terms of what the Electrotech revolution can mean for climate action, we can probably get something like 80 to 90% of the way there with just stoking the Electrotech revolution. And it will come with the secondary hope that innovation from the Electrotech revolution can spill over into the sectors where we now think it's not possible. So, for instance, we had, of course, the hydrogen hype is now behind us, but hydrogen would be an example of one of those technologies that is high operating cost, low capital cost. That could be a backup. A part of the reason why people got so excited about hydrogen for the power system, it's high operating cost, low capital cost. That could replace gas backup. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, but it's one of those technologies that, we might see pop up in the 2040s as the new solution to the last mile problem.
And I would just bet personally, based on how fast batteries are progressing, that by the 2040s, we'll have like batteries that can last a month or something. Like there's so much innovation in the battery space. I personally would just bet on batteries beyond anything that we can currently conceive of. I'm not an expert, but just looking at how far we've come in the last 10 to 15 years, I would bet on batteries continuing to exceed our expectations.
Yeah, Dan, what about that? I was wondering that too. I mean, why don't you guys think that batteries can do the last 5%? Or do you not think that?
Well, it can eat into it, right? So it depends a little bit on what price point you're looking at. We're currently talking about battery energy storage systems. There was just a new announcement by BNEF. We're talking about $70 per kilowatt hour for a battery storage system. It's, by the way, crazy. It used to be 700 a few years back, right? Still, my mental model is still batteries $600 per kilowatt. No, they're 70 now. Crazy, crazy cheap. This is now based on making the jump from so-called NMC batteries to LFP batteries. So this is the different design of a battery, and that enabled primarily Chinese producers to now offer batteries at much lower cost. We believe that 70 can easily become sub 50 in terms of cost. So there's easily more potential in here. But we're also seeing now on the horizon new sodium-ion batteries coming in. And the promise of the cost that sodium-ion batteries can deliver is of a whole different order of magnitude. We're suddenly talking about, the potential for $10 per kilowatt hour batteries, or maybe even lower in the long term. Now, if you start thinking about sort of these gradations where sort of under the NMC system, like the original chemistry system, you would probably only get to like 60 to 70% solar battery wind penetration. If you now add these new battery costs and trajectories on top, that's where you probably can get to like, 85, 90, maybe 95 in some regions. When we get to the sodium prices level of cost, then it's really a little bit all bets are off. Because indeed, as Sam points out, suddenly you can start thinking about monthly storage of these with batteries. Suddenly you can start thinking about balancing out whole months. Or maybe even if you go far below 10, you can start thinking about seasonal, like from one season to the next storage. And at that point, the sort of last 5% that we're talking about already becomes the last 2% that we're talking about, or the last 1%. So this is already going to eat into the margin, and it's incredibly exciting what's happening in the battery space. But again, these are all trends and trajectories that we can now try to forecast, and we can kind of see what would happen in like 2045 when it also would become relevant. For now, there's just plenty of runway for batteries to scale into the system. And there's a good potential that batteries can also help fill in the last couple percent. It won't be ever 100% with batteries, but you can definitely get to very high numbers.
Well, I confess that I completely lost track of time, and I think the moral of the story for everybody here is this is what happens, folks, when you get some energy nerds, talking energy. We could just like we're just like some guys
Go all
talking
day,
about
Brett. Yeah.
football, right? We could just go on and on, but the grown-ups have arrived. Liz, why don't you kind of bring some discipline to the proceedings?
For sure. Thank you guys for this really engaging conversation and all the detail here. This has been great to learn more of this info. All right, if you like what we're doing, please consider supporting Climate Action Now by becoming a member. We're a really small, scrappy team, and the CAN membership is really how we keep going and bringing you more hopeful events like this. We've also got 2 events live on our Eventbrite right now for the next monthly Dose of Climate Hope series. In January, we'll have a year in review event with Sam where he'll reflect on everything from 2025 and give you a sense of where we're going forward. And then we'll be having Hannah Ritchie as our February monthly Dose of Climate Hope speaker, which we're super excited about. She's an incredible data scientist known for her work with Our World and Data. We've dropped links to both of those events in the chat. And the final thing is that the carousel that you've been using today is available for any group to use for free. So whether you're part of a congregation, a book club, a student club, a civic organization, whatever it may be, we've also dropped links in the chat for that purpose. So anyone can be taking actions like what we've done today. I would like to share a final thanks to Sam and Dan for your time with us today on this conversation. It's been a wonderful conversation. And with that, I think we'll wrap up and open our breakout room for just the panel, please. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and we'll be sending out a recording soon.
Thank you,
Thank you
everybody.
all and happy holidays.
Yeah, happy holiday.